So on the first day of class, we rarely have time to get the lab notebooks fully set up, and you want to have it set and ready to go before you start writing up your lab so you don't make extra work for yourself. If you have your lab notebook, the handouts we gave you in class, glue stick, or some tape, you should be able to do all of this at home. So your lab notebook should have a sticker on the front with your name on it. If you don't have that, reach out to your instructor and we'll make sure we get you that. On the inside front cover right here, we want you to glue your MPA chemistry lab safety rules. Do make sure you read over these carefully, and you're going to get your signature, and then whoever your trusted adult at home is, they should sign this as well. There's an assignment in Schoology to take a selfie of you running through these rules and signing it with that adult. And so you can submit that there whenever you get a chance, and make sure it's signed in the lab notebook. It might take you a few days to do that, and that's okay. The other piece to put in the front of the lab notebook is right here, this rules for maintaining your lab notebook. And this is something you should refer back to often. There's definitely some key points to think about in here. Things like don't tear out the pages, or if you make a mistake, don't fully obliterate it, just cross it off gently so we can still see the work. You should only be writing in blue or black ink. And in fact, I would much prefer black ink only. Just makes it easier to read through the lab notebooks. It's a little bit more professional, and then it's easier to correct if we are correcting another color. So I do think there are times where you might want to do some color coding in your lab notebook, particularly when you're collecting data or making notes. And I don't have a problem with that, but the primary color that you use should be black. If you're gluing things in, make sure you use plenty of glue so they stay in. If you're taping, perhaps tape them all the way around. So this goes right here, and that way you'll always see this when you open up the lab notebook, the rules for keeping the lab notebook and the components of the lab report. Okay, from there, at the back of the book, there's a few additional references that you should put in. So at the very back of your book here on the last page, you should have a periodic table of elements. I think the one that you have is a little bit different than this one and a little bit easier to use and read. And then on this page, you should have the chemistry lab equipment. So if you run into anything like a scupula or a ring stand clamp and you don't know what it is, you can probably find it here. There's a little extra space if you need to make some extra notations over time, but I think this is pretty comprehensive of most of the equipment we use in the lab. So that's all the things that you need to glue in for resources. We might at a later date add some more things to the resources in the back, like a periodic ions chart, or other reference charts. But for now, that should be enough. You can see this corner is already coming up, so do make sure you glue all the way to the corner, or if it's easier, you can actually just run some tape around here. Okay, now there's some nuts and bolts things that we need to set up for the lab notebook. So one of the things you'll see here is that we're going to have the date on the top right-hand corner of every page. I don't know that we need to date this first page, but once we start writing lab reports, we'll do that. And then we're also supposed to have a page number on the bottom outside corner. So I can make this page number 1, and then I can flip over one page, and this becomes page number 2, page number 3. Okay, at the top of page number 3, this is where you're going to write table of contents. And then anytime you add a new lab to the lab notebook, you should put it into the table of contents with the page number. Okay, then we're going to flip another page. This is page 4, and this is page 5. We always start a lab on this side of the paper. And so because this is our first lab, we're going to date the top right-hand corner. So we can date that 8/26/25, or whatever the date is that you're doing this particular lab. And then from here, we can start to reference the lab handout to figure out what we need to put into the lab itself. So every lab should have the same components. You can find those in a couple different places. So if you flip back here, you can see, okay, we're going to have a title, a purpose, a hypothesis, if applicable. We're not going to do that in this lab. Background information, procedure, data and observations, analysis questions, and a conclusion. So we want to set up the same thing for this lab. I do also want to point out that you have your chemistry syllabus as well for a reference. And if you go into the chemistry syllabus, you're going to find that same page about what should be in your lab report. And then on the next page, you're going to see the components of the lab report a little bit expanded out. So it describes the title, that the title should be descriptive and summarize what was done in the experiment. We'll get back to that in a second for this first alchemy lab. And then it just runs through each of the components and what we're looking for. And this might be really helpful for you to reference. The other thing that we have, and I think this is getting a bit ahead of ourselves on the first day of chemistry, is this lab notebook benchmark. And these are some of the things that we're looking for as we're grading lab notebooks. Obviously, you're not going to be hitting all of these things on your very first lab report on the very first day. But over time, this is what we're hoping to develop as a skill. So let's go back to the alchemy lab, and we have this handout. So the first thing that you can do is you can put a title on the top of your lab report. So you can write alchemy lab. Now, one of the things I just read was about how a title should be descriptive and summarize the lab. So you can see that's not really a good title, and you might want to put a subtitle underneath it that has a better summary of the lab. That can be a whole sentence. And right here, it also is always a good idea to list your lab partner as well. Okay, from here, you're going to have a couple sections that go into the lab report. We're going to have a purpose. And then we have a series of pre-lab questions. You can do this in a couple different ways. You could write up answers to all the pre-lab questions with a 1, 2, 3, 4. If you do that, though, you want to write in full sentences, because one of the goals of your lab report is that it should stand alone from this handout. So no one should have to look at this handout to know what you're answering here. A better approach is to actually take these 4 questions and write them up into a short paragraph that becomes your background paragraph. So I didn't fill in a purpose. I'm going to let you do that by looking at the lab handout. You can either copy this directly, or now that we've done the lab and you know a little bit more about it, you can write something slightly different for the purpose if you want. So fill that in. Then you're going to write that short background paragraph. Again, I'll let you do that on your own. And then we have the procedure. Now, many times we're going to ask you to write in a full step-by-step procedure or summarize the procedure. In this case, we actually gave you a copy of the procedure to make things easier, and you can just paste that into the lab notebook as well. So that can be pasted right here. And then from there, you're going to flip the page. And this is important as well. You're going to continue to put the date right here. So we would add the date here. So we'd write 8/26/25. And then page number goes down here as well. So this is page 6. And then we can continue on with the lab. If you look at what occurs in the lab, you're going to need to recreate a data table. Now, this is something that we typically don't allow you to do, where you've written your observations on another sheet of paper and then you're writing them into the lab notebook. But in this case, it's okay. First lab, we're just getting things figured out. So you can recreate that data table right here, and then you can start your analysis questions here. Now, when you're answering the analysis questions, excuse me, make sure that you're writing in full sentences and you're recapping enough of the question so that these questions make sense to someone who's reading your lab report without access to this handout. So if you're talking about, did you really produce gold? Why or why not? You might say, yes. Actually, don't say it that way. Say, in this lab, I really produced gold because ... Or you could say, in this lab, I did not actually produce gold because ... But make sure these stand out from the handout, and someone would not need to reference the handout in order to be able to answer the question. So for homework tonight, you should answer some of these questions. We'll select which ones together, and that will be listed in Schoology. You don't have to answer all of them. And then in another day or two, we'll have you write a summary conclusion, but you don't have to do that on the first night. So basically, that's how you would set up your lab notebook and start to write up your first lab report. There's one thing I forgot. Can you think of what it would be? I didn't add it to the table of contents. So again, get this glued in, but I'm on page 5 here. So if I go to the table of contents, I can say page 5, and I can write the alchemy lab. And that's really all you need to do. If you have any questions, bring them to class tomorrow. This first time, we'll expect you to have the purpose, the background, the procedure, a data and observations table. the analysis question, but no conclusion yet. And we can double check the formatting and anything that you've done before you actually turn the lab in itself. One thing just to be cognizant of is our AI policy, which is here, and it's expanded a bit in the syllabus as well. So you can take a look at some of these things and you can make sure that you're really following that and honoring that as you answer these questions, because it is really important that you're using these lab questions to learn chemistry. That's the ultimate objective here. We don't really care what AI has to say about these questions. We care what you have to say about these questions, and we really want you to do that thinking and processing on your own. Reach out if you have any questions as you set these up. Good luck on the analysis questions. We'll talk more about them tomorrow.